Welcome to the very first episode of Maple History, a Canadian history podcast. I'm your host, Christina Austin, and my guest today is my husband, Simon.
Hi, everyone.
Today we are going to begin at the beginning. You may wonder why I'm starting at the dawn of time, more or less, and it's a good question. I think that it is really important to have an understanding, as best we can, of how inextricably entrenched Indigenous people are in the land, that they have been here since forever and a day, so that when we get to the part of the story of European contact, we can feel what a collision of cultures that was. So, where did it all start? What we had been taught in high school, I'm sure you remember, Simon.
Oh, yeah.
Is the story of Beringia, which was the area that connected North America to Siberia before the sea levels rose when the Ice Age ended. This origin story isn't incorrect, but there's so much more known and even disputed today about how humans came to be on this continent. A high school or elementary history class could not cover all the history of North America from time immemorial. But we were basically taught that humans came over what was essentially Russia via the land bridge, killed all the mammoths, then poof, the people the Europeans met in the 15th century were there. Well, let's start at the beginning today, and we'll talk about how much more complicated and interesting the human story of Canada and North America really is. I think it's fair to say that if you ask most adults, not even just Gen X, how humans came to be in North America, you would get an answer that sounds like they came over from Siberia from a land bridge, and that's now the Bering Strait. Does that sound about right?
That does. That's really all I remember.
Yeah, honestly. Yeah. All right, here's a long version of this theory. Beringia was exposed around 70,000 years ago because the Ice Age had locked up so much of Earth's water. I admit that I had an image in my mind of a relatively narrow passage when I learned of this all back in the day. I don't know, what, grade 7?
Something like that. It's hard to remember.
I know, it's a blur. But it was actually 600 miles wide with rivers, lakes, and a thriving ecosystem with plants and animals that could support people in its own right, rather than just a passageway to somewhere else. People crossed over from Siberia into Beringia, and after hanging out in Beringia for however long, an ice-free corridor opened up as the Cordilleran and Laurentide glaciers began to thaw.
Those are some big words.
I know. So anyways, those two glaciers, there was a gap. So people made their way south. As they moved down, the population grew to a level that, as they continued to hunt, their numbers led to the overkill of their prey. So as far as this theory goes, humans scooted over the land bridge, went down through the ice-free corridor between two glaciers, all the way down to South America while decimating several species of prey, all within 1,000 years. Pretty impressive feat for humanity, if true. I mean, we are really giving Earth a run for her money now with our species extinctions. But I find this explanation of how humans came to populate North and South America to be not quite right, and it is debated by current scholars. So that's what we learned and what kind of was the prevailing theory for all our adult life, I'd say, up until.
Hold on. So they crossed the land bridge and killed all the mammals within 1,000 years? Did I hear you say that right?
Yep.
Wow.
Not all the mammals, but all like the big ones.
Well, yeah. The big mega fauna or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
Wow. That is impressive.
That's the theory. Because there was a big extinction. And so I'll get into that in a little bit because that's part of the debate. All right, so for a long time, the first people in North America were called Clovis people or Clovis culture by archaeologists. This refers to the archaeological findings of spear points that were originally discovered in a little town in New Mexico called Clovis. What they found there were all sorts of tools, and the standout one was this point. This is a fairly large spearhead that Charles Mann, in his book 1491, said looked like little goldfish crackers because of the distinct tail. And I thought that was a helpful image. Archaeologists used the methodology of their colleagues in Blackwater Draw, which is near Clovis, that they had done a dig a number of years before that, to look for all sorts of other sites on the continent. And the carbon dating of all these other different sites after they found the one in Clovis, wherever they are across North America, were between 13,500 and 12,900. So that's quite a tight age range for these carbon dating. So that was those dates in the archaeologist's mind, linked everything. So these sites are all over, and there is at least one in Alberta. I say at least one because one, I can't remember if there's more than one that they've already found, and there could be more. They just haven't found them yet. So C. Vance Haynes, a geologist turned archaeologist in the early 1960s, believed that the Clovis culture arose just after the only time period in which migration from Siberia seemed to have been possible. So that's kind of solidified the whole, what they call Clovis first, is like these are the first people, and that was the only possibility because of his understanding of ice corridor and the sites that they've found. Does that kind of make sense so far?
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes the at least in terms of like they found the closed points. They were all dated to the same range, all within kind of like this 1,000-year time span. It's all lining up. It seems pretty tidy.
Yeah, so that's what they found so far. So then other researchers built on this Clovis first theory and added on the overkill theory as an answer to where all these spectacular creatures that roam North America went. The mastodon, the dire wolves. Didn't know we had those. I thought that was just Game of Thrones. Saber-toothed cats, huge beavers, giant sloths, armored rhinos, and the list of Pleistocene monsters goes on. And they all went extinct a little over 10,000 years ago. So it's quite a tight range.
I I've never heard of armored rhinos.
I know.
That's amazing.
I mean, that's a huge, like giant beavers. Sorry, just
I'd heard of like the huge sloths.
yeah, because aren't they in like the movie Ice Age?
I think so. I remember seeing skulls of them and thinking they look like ogre skulls. I think I'm gonna
Oh,
have that
okay.
from when I was a kid. I don't know.
Maybe. I haven't seen those ones. But anyhow. Okay, so the main champion of the overkill theory was Paul Martin, not the former Liberal finance minister and PM, but an archaeologist from Arizona who believed that the timeline of the ice-free corridor opening, the spread of Clovis culture tools, and the extinction of many Pleistocene animals is no coincidence. The theory kind of goes is that there was a baby boom of epic proportions as these hunters swept down the continent on a rampage of killing that took out large animals. This wasn't that popular of a theory among paleontologists, who noted that many plant species went extinct and other extinctions preceded the mammoths. They believe that climate change is more likely a culprit than a population explosion of hunters hell-bent on taking out as many mammoths and mastodons as possible. Even though the overkill theory didn't seem that popular among scholars, it seemed to have stuck in the zeitgeist of the general thinking of what happened when humans came over. This could have been because of the rising popularity of environmental awareness in the late 1960s and 70s. So it fit with the idea that this is what people do, so logically it must have been what the Indigenous people did when they came over the land bridge.
Kill everything. Super predators. All right.
Yep. Yeah, it's like, well, we're doing horrible things, so they must have too. Anyways, this is definitely a theory that is debated among academics, and there are reasonable points made for both sides. It's certainly possible that hunters helped push extinction along, but it's doubtful that they were the main cause. Thankfully, researchers didn't give up, and much more plausible explanations about how humans populated North America and South America have arisen in the past 2 decades. Okay, so what really happened? Well, at least the current theories. With how many theories and new findings that are happening these days, it feels like an age of discovery for paleoarchaeology, which that must be thrilling for them. I'm very happy for them. It's like Ross Geller must just be thrilled. In one article I read, one scientist commented that there seems to be a significant journal article in the field every 4 months or so.
Still.
It just must be amazing. I mean, the first 2 popular theories is the Beringian standstill hypothesis. This theory goes that the people of Siberia, I'm generalizing here, migrated over to Beringia and then became trapped there by glaciers and spent 10 to 20,000 years there before the ice-free corridor opened up with the melting of the glaciers. When the ice-free corridor people migrated south, it led to a genetic split between the people that would become the Dene Athabascan people and more southern indigenous people. So this would have included the Clovis people. The other main theory that is becoming more and more popular in the last decade or so is the use of a kelp highway. The idea is that because the world's water was trapped in the glaciers, the sea level was much lower, upwards of 400 feet or 125 meters. I should say 125 meters because it is a Canadian podcast. During the last glacial maximum, which is an awesome term. So that's roughly 20,000 years ago. That's like as far down as it means that's as far down as the glaciers got before they retreated, if that makes sense. And then they use acronyms in the archaeology book. It makes it really confusing.
As far south as they got, or as
Yeah. So the glaciers went down,
yeah,
like from the Arctic or wherever, and then because they expanded, because they took thousands and thousands of years, and then they stopped growing,
yeah,
and then they started retreating. And they stopped, and like we're talking thousands of years before they retreated.
oh yeah, and that's why like all of the Canadian geography is all glaciated and all. There's like the thousands and thousands of lakes, and we have the Canadian Shield and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And sorry, I want to get back really quick to. It's really hard to imagine 125 meters. Like that is so deep.
Yeah. And when they're talking about when the glaciers retreat, they use terms like, oh well, the land popped back up after the weight of the glacier, but it's like, well, they didn't pop back up. We're talking paleontology. We're talking it popped back up over hundreds of years
Yeah.
as the earth kind of took a sigh of relief from that pressure. So it is hard to wrap your mind around it.
Yeah. Like did you say that the water was 125 meters deeper?
Lower.
Like lower. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And then the pressure of the ice on the land, it would compress all the dirt and all that sort of stuff, but then would
Everything. Yeah.
also even like water tables and stuff would get like crushed. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So that's for the last glacial maximum. They always do LGM. Anyways, I had to learn all sorts of terms. So this aspect gets very sciencey very fast. So I'm just gonna because this is like marine paleoarchaeology. So this is getting deep. The sea levels were so low. Because the sea levels were so low, a lot of land was exposed, creating new islands, isthmuses, peninsulas with relatively shallow areas where kelp could grow. This gave a hospitable environment to sea life that could sustain sea mammals, crustaceans, etc., and humans that could traverse down this fertile coastline without having to go inland to hunt big game. Well, and even they couldn't even go inland for a lot of this because it was ice. Like there wasn't big game on all of this. So they're the land was exposed, and then kind of to the east would have been ice, if that kind of gives you a visual.
Yeah, no, it does. And like, yeah, 125 meters, it would expose a tremendous amount of land.
Yeah. So during this time, like Japan, they were connected. The islands of Japan were all connected.
Yeah, yeah, of course they would be. Yeah.
So it's like, oh, right, okay. So just all this kind of wrapping your head around what Earth looked like while there was humans there, kind of navigating all this. Okay, and so the large kelp forests helped to reduce the wave energy as well as it crashed into the shore, which would have been immensely helpful for allowing the seafaring humans in skin boats that they were believed to have traveled in.
Sorry, tell me more about skin boats.
Yeah, no, it's it's a super gross way to refer to the type of boats that they must have used. I think they could have come up with something much better than skin boat. With all of our human creativity and language, they went with skin boat.
Do you mean, is it like what I'm thinking is human skin? Please
No.
don't tell me it's human. Okay.
No, we're hides.
Okay. Hides. All right.
They hunted sea mammals.
Yeah. Okay. That
But
makes
no,
more
it
sense.
does. When I read it, as soon as I read skin boats, I got Silence of the Lambs vibes. It puts the lotion or gets the hose. So, all right. Anyways, there are like The Inuit, they have better words for like boats made of hide. They have the umiak, which is a large boat. Like,
Okay.
why don't we go umiak rather than skin boat?
That's makes more sense. Yeah.
Okay. Although we would have considered it nightmarishly difficult to travel in these boats, it was likely an easier way to travel than going through the ice-free corridor. So, like, it wasn't ice-free corridor wouldn't have been this like delightful green passageway. It would have had glaciers, raging rivers, mountains, and much more extreme weather conditions than the coast.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course it would.
Would have been terrifying.
Yeah. Like I've hiked on glaciers, and you have to be really, really, really careful. There's huge crevasses and stuff like that that you can fall into if you don't know what you're doing,
Yep. So they would have,
and it's very cold.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the water would have been delicious, but whatever. Okay, so there's research being done of coastal regions that show that areas that are currently underwater and have been for thousands and thousands of years had been dry land, however long ago, that could have supported humans and other mammals. This is research that is beyond my understanding, but I assume it's a mix of geology, marine studies, and marine archaeology, God knows what else. But researchers are also taking into account Indigenous oral histories and traditions and using that information to help them with their research. There are Indigenous oral traditions that reference a time before trees cover the land, or to land where there is none now. So the theory of the Kelp Highway, which is it's a much more logical theory to explain the age of some of the earliest archaeological sites. And one of them is Bluefish Caves in northern Yukon. Paulette Steeves, a professor at Algoma University, believes there is evidence that there were humans there as long as 24,000 years BP. And that BP is a term they use as before present. Basically, this means before 1950.
Okay. Yeah. Either way, yeah. 24,000.
There's a long explanation, but it doesn't matter. We're talking thousands of years. It's fine. So this is a somewhat controversial take because of stuff to do with ancient horsebone deposits and stone flakes that some researchers believe could have accumulated through natural deposits. But you'll need to listen to a paleoarchaeology podcast to find out those details because it's confusing when they start talking about stone flakes and deciding what age those are. My eyes glazed many times.
Totally fair. Yeah.
So I don't even know what I read because they're talking about. Listen, God love them. They did good work, but it's not for me. All right, what is becoming less and less controversial as the evidence of very ancient people inhabiting areas far more south grows is that humans have been here far longer than 12,000 years ago. One of the best known sites for evidence of how long humans have been in North America is the White Sands National Park in New Mexico, where scientists believe that 20,000 plus year old human footprints have been found.
Okay.
So, how does someone carbon test a footprint? Basically, they don't. They test the pollen samples found in the archaeological layers that the footprint is found. The first type of testing had a lot of criticism because it was a water plant pollen, and the critics said that that type of pollen could have been contaminated by older pollen particles because of the water that had been in.
All right.
That's a kind of a basic explanation. So they tested conifer pollen samples using, oh God, here we go, using a mass spectrometer and quartz grains using optically stimulated luminescence to determine where the footprints were from 23,000 years ago to 21,000 years ago. Yeah. And for love of God, don't ask me how to explain what optically stimulated luminescence is. Do you know what that is?
I I could probably I could take a guess. I might embarrass myself if I if I try to do that. That's
Well, let's just trust that the people that optically luminize the quartz understood it.
yeah. I used a mass spectrometer back when I was in university, but I don't think I don't think I ever did any optical stimulation.
Of quartz to date anything.
Of course, no, definitely didn't do any dating.
All right, so it's important to have evidence to back up theories when humans came to North America. And Paulette Steeves put it well. She wrote, "New knowledge, open minds, technology, and science are enriching what we know about the human past on a global scale, America's included." So, to have an understanding of why the scientific world spun its wheels for so long on the ideas that humans couldn't have been in North America earlier than 12,000 years ago, we need a villain to the story. So, to me, that villain is Ales Hrdlička. So, he was the head of anthropology at the Smithsonian from 1903 to 1941 and the founder of the American Journal of Physical Anthropology. He had a stranglehold on the field and believed that Indigenous people had only been in North America for 3,000 years and was exceedingly pissy about anyone who dared suggest otherwise.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
He would ruin people's careers.
Oh, wow. Okay. That guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. So he was probably seething that the Folsom site, which is an archaeological site in New Mexico discovered in 1927, so this is before Clovis, sites were found, was proven to be dated 11,000 to 10,000 years BP. And then a couple of years later, the Clovis site was found and it was 13,000 years old. He must have been spitting nails. You know what? You won't be surprised. He was a big fan of eugenics too.
Oh, of course. Yes.
He was on that team.
Team Eugenics. All right. A lot of winners there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that date seemed to be about all he could tolerate and would ruin someone's career if they had the audacity to suggest that any archaeological sites discovered showed that humans had been in North America before Clovis. So, stifling anyone's career who wanted to pursue lines of inquiry that would lead to an older date as to when Indigenous came to North America was a huge factor in why Clovis first grew as the dominant theory, because it just wouldn't allow any others. And then all these.
Was it a specific political agenda, or like it's just he just had this belief? He's like, this is it. This is the answer, and I have nothing else.
Well, he just couldn't fathom the idea that Indigenous people were here for so long, because he just didn't think that, well, for
Okay.
the same reasons that people are on team eugenics,
Yeah. Okay.
because they're horrible racists.
Yeah.
Yeah, those things get awfully simple when you start reading into it and you're like, oh, it's pretty awful. So, and then there would have been all sorts of scholars that studied archaeology that were kind of tightly bound into this Clovis first belief system. And then they trained more scholars, and then they trained scholars.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just stuck. But there's the good thing about scholarship is that people are curious and they keep looking. And that's what they did. So that dominated the archaeology field until the 90s. And then there's a so-called paradigm buster site in Monteverde, Chile, that was dated to 33,000 years BP. This wasn't the only place where archaeologists were working before the 90s in search of pre-Clovis sites. The Monteverde site seemed to have squashed any doubts that had been lingering among Clovis first supporters. So that's basically, that theory is kind of dead.
Yeah. Yeah. Like they probably also came across the strait.
That's exactly it. Is that it's not, there wasn't just one, like, it wasn't just like one wave of immigration.
Yeah, it's too simple a way to think about it, right?
Yeah.
Like, of course there were multiples. Like, of course it was ongoing. Yeah.
Like constant, just constant. And then, like, people would group up and then they'd split apart because they're hunter gatherers. They group, split. That group would group and split, grow and split, and then they would move down or move east or west or wherever looking for more food.
Yeah.
Research have added on to the coastal migration theory, which is the kelp highway theory, by suggesting how they made the shift from foraging and hunting in the rich kelp beds on the coast to moving inland. So in a relatively recent article in the Journal of Northwest Anthropology, two researchers, Dale Crows and Vic Kuchera, sorry if I said your name wrong, even included a fun little story of how they imagine these people traveled inland by finding the Chehalis River after spending generations living off the kelp beds. So that's kind of, my geography is not great, but I think it was like, when I looked up on the map, it's like Oregon, around there.
Okay.
That's where that is.
So hold on. They thought for generations they lived off of the kelp beds. So they just like lived in boats.
Yeah.
Essentially were boat people.
Or like there would be like cliffs and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, and like little islands and yeah, like that, have little, okay.
Yeah. The isthmuses, whatever they are, I forget what they are. Geography was a long time ago. Yeah, so they'd be in the boats. We'll call them umiaks so we don't gross each other out. And then they'd be on the little islands, or they'd be on the cliffs, and they'd kind of be coastal people, more or less.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's how, like, the Bluefish Caves up in Yukon, like, that's why they were on the coast.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
All right, so these guys, they took a little dip into creative writing, and they created a whole, like, family and about what they imagined these people were doing, and going in the boats, and there's a little thing about a child and the, like, splashing and playing with things, and anyways, they were happy for them to have such fun. But my favorite part of their story was when they wrote about how they imagined they would find these large barnacles that, when eaten raw, they'd get buzz.
Because that's what humans do.
They do. I'm like, hell yeah.
We've got this massive liver. We're going to get messed up.
Yeah. Because they cook them, but then I guess they chomp on them, and I'm like, woo!
Is that real?
Yeah, apparently. They didn't make it up.
That's amazing.
They like, they made up the story part, but not like, they're using their real research, you know what I mean? What they know about the coastal area.
So there are now, or there was at sometimes, raw barnacles you could eat to get messed up.
Yeah, just a little buzz.
Yeah, just a little.
Take the edge off of living in a skin boat.
Yes.
They said they do not have any archaeological evidence to back up the Chehalis River hypothesis, and sorry if I'm saying that river wrong to any West Coast Americans. But who knows what they can learn in the future. So this is definitely kind of in the mainstream of theorizing, that they're going with the current academic view of a combination of the coastal migration theory and the ice free corridor theory for how humans made their way inland and south and then east on the continent as the glaciers retreated. So Paulette Steeves believes that it is possible that humans came to North America before the Ice Age happened. And that's an interesting idea too. She talks about how there was a time before the Cordilleran and Laurentide glaciers expanded to meet up, where it was possible for humans to have traveled to North America. And I mean, who knows? The trouble with all this is finding evidence for something so long ago that would have been covered over by glaciers. They ebbed and flowed over millennia.
Okay.
That's all those kind of the mainstream theories. And then there is another theory that people came up with that it really got people's hackles up, and it's the Solutrean hypothesis. And it was even the subject of an episode of CBC's The Nature of Things, and it was fairly controversial as an episode on Stone Age archaeology can be. It may have been so controversial that since I watched it back on the Gem app, it has since been removed and can only now be seen on YouTube. Or they were just clearing space on the app. I don't know. But if you're interested, it's called Icebridge. So the basic gist of the Solutrean hypothesis, as proposed by Bruce Bradley and Dennis Stanford, is that people living in the areas that are now France and Spain, called the Solutreans, traveled across the Atlantic during the last glacial maximum to North America. They used the ice itself to travel by almost island hopping on ice floes and using skin boats in between to travel and use as shelter. So according to Bradley and Stanford, they hunted sea mammals such as the great auk along the way. That's an extinct bird because it was a nice, happy little bird and we just killed it. Anyhow, sad story. So they argue that the Solutrean people are the origins of the Clovis people, and they went east to west populating North America on their way once they landed on the east coast of North America. They say that the people that came down the ice-free corridor came later, and acknowledge that this goes counter to the current scholarly view. Their evidence for this is some stone tools that are very similar to those of the Solutreans that are found in Europe, that were found in Chesapeake Bay, as well as some other rather complicated DNA evidence from some indigenous remains. This is an extremely simplified version of what their evidence is. If you want a deep dive, there's a whole book, but don't. Anyway.
Don't.
No. Thankfully, because this is such a toxic and controversial topic in the field, there are several articles that really lay into it. It feels like this got a lot of academics good and pissed off, and I love reading angry academics go after each other. So restrained, but I can't help but imagine the mutterings and cursing they were doing when they were reading what they consider to be dead wrong or straight bullshit. So the strongest argument against the Solutrean hypothesis is that the dates Bradley and Stanford give for some of the artifacts that they found predate the European Solutrean people. So Michael O'Brien, who's one of the authors of, there's many authors on this article, but Michael O'Brien was the lead, wrote in their article called On Thin Ice, Problems with Stanford Bradley's Proposed Solutrean Colonization of North America. So I quote, if we are to believe that the technological similarities Stanford and Bradley observed between the Middle Atlantic and Iberia are historically related, we are forced to conclude from their own data that they appeared first in North America and then were transferred to Europe. Yeah. They went back and forth, and yeah, they were. I'm on Mr. O'Brien's side here.
Yeah.
So Stanford and Bradley believe that the evidence they found, which was a spear point that looked similar to Solutrean spear points, was over 20,000 years old. The Solutrean people lived between approximately 21,000 to 17,000 years ago. So that's their side. And Jennifer Raff, a geneticist who was one of the scientists that appeared on the documentary, and she was there to argue against the hypothesis. She did it very gently in the documentary, but she wrote an article for The Guardian after the show aired that really broke down further her case of why this show and theory are so problematic. So first off, there's no evidence of boat use by the Solutreans.
Oh.
It doesn't mean that they didn't. Sorry?
I said, oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty damning.
I mean, it doesn't mean that they didn't use boats, because they would have rotted away for so long ago, but you can't prove a negative.
Yeah, fair.
I mean, I guess the same could go for the Kelp Highway theory, because they don't have boats either.
Yeah.
But secondly, the stone tools and the use of overshot flaking to make them that is found on both continents could have been developed by two completely unrelated people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this was brought up in the show itself, but they and I think that's pretty solid evidence that they just could have. I mean, there's only so many ways you can make spear points with stone.
Yeah. Yeah, there's only so much. There's been parallel development of very complex things, like inventions in modern times. And so and then very, very complex stuff. So yeah, I'm not surprised that you could have
like calculus.
Yeah. Yeah.
So German guy and whatever his name is.
Newton. Yeah. Leibniz and Newton. Different techniques, but yes. Yeah. Sure. General ideas. Yeah.
So the most controversial piece of evidence that Raff goes into more detail in her article, because she's a geneticist, in the show, they go on a long segment talking about specific genetic markers, saying that this haplogroup X is evidence of a European connection. I will not go into great detail of this because I don't understand it. In her article, which was in The Guardian, so it was for a lay audience. She writes that they tested some pre-contact indigenous remains of Wyandot people and found this genetic marker. She points out that there has not been any genetic sequencing of Solutrean people, and she cautioned against trying to use the haplogroup X as a defining marker for the Solutrean people when the European gene pool was only formed about 8,000 years ago.
Huh. Okay.
And there are many different versions of this marker. And the oldest remains of an indigenous person found in North America he's called the Ancient One. He's also known as the Kennewick Man. And there is no European ancestry in his DNA, which has been fully sequenced.
Well, I mean, it's also it's one of those things where could it have happened? Like, could they have come over? I mean, maybe.
Sure.
But I mean, it's also one of those things where it's like, are they were they the first?
Yeah, they're not the genesis of humanity on North America. They're just one of, maybe. And the Solutrean theory is that they are the genesis of it. So you can't.
And there's the ones in Chile that you said that were 30,000 years old.
What are the other people doing? What the footprint people doing? So where'd they come from?
Unless, as you said, they went backwards. They went the other way, which is also entirely possible.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be something that indigenous North Americans colonized Europe? Anyhow, I'm not proposing that as a real theory. It's just a joke.
I am. I'm proposing that. You heard it here first.
Yeah. So why did I even bring this theory up? Because it's more or less been debunked. Is it really riled me up to see that this theory got so much airtime on a pretty mainstream media of CBC. And I agree with many of the scholars who dunked on it because it is irresponsible. White supremacists really love this theory because it feeds into their belief that white people deserve the whole continent of North America. And by saying ancient Europeans were here first, then they can continue to dismiss the Indigenous people that say they have always been here. And the Bradley and they don't. They're just saying that, well, if white supremacists think that, then that's their problem. But that's just irresponsible. Like you're proposing this theory, and I know that scientists.
I think that you also deserve to get dunked on. Like if there's flaws on it, like then you deserve to absolutely to get trounced by people that know a lot better than you.
Yeah, and the show itself was. Oh, actually, I'll get into that in a sec. All right, yeah. So on that episode of Nature of Things, the CBC on CBC, there was a strange desperation in the show that made me think it was filmed by the same people that do the History Channel show, The Curse of Oak Island. They had tension building music. They had kind of this fake discovery moment with like, woo, like uplifting music, whoa, wow. And they even had, they were doing a dig on like a sand on, like right on the coast in Chesapeake area to look for more evidence. But they were doing it like on a sand cliff with scaffolding. And I'm like, why didn't you just do a more inland, traditional kind of like those pit things that they dig? Like, what do they call them?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I just I don't know what they're called.
Anyways, like an archaeological trench. Like, why did you have to do scaffolding on a sand cliff? And then the thing collapsed.
Of course.
It was
Yeah.
made of sand. Anyhow, yeah. So they had someone walking along the beach and they found a point. And I'm like, well, from the relatively small amount that I've read about archaeology, is that you need to have the stratification to see where in time that piece was from. Just because you found it on the coast, it doesn't mean it's from that time because it's a stone tool.
Yeah. You just found a random rock. Like it might as well be,
It could have
right?
just been a broken rock,
Yeah.
like in a weird way. Like, sure, like they have ways to test and like to look at the evidence and compare. Like the people who are experts on stone tool making, they really know what they're talking about and they can spot it a mile away.
Sure.
Not like a lay person who like looks at something that looks like an arrowhead and it's just a rock. Like
Yeah.
a trained eye can tell.
I feel like if you're gonna date it though, like like or ascribe it to something very specific, especially if it's a new theory, you've really got to like cross all the T's and dot all the I's.
Yeah, like the people that found the footprints.
Yeah.
And they got criticism. They're like, all right, we'll go back and we'll find like that's a fair point. That type of water based plant, sure. That carbon in that could have come from ancient water and it
Hmm.
could have been a more recent plant. So anyhow, so yeah, so it was a good show to watch just to see kind of what's going on. But it's kind of like it goes like the fellas doing the Chehalis River imaginings. It's it's kind of the far extreme of that. Whereas like sure they're going with the current theories and kind of building upon it to see how people could have moved inland from coastal living, and that's their hypothesis, their theory that they don't have evidence for yet. Whereas these other guys are saying, no, this is the way.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's the contrast. I felt it was important to start this podcast with an understanding of just how long Indigenous people have lived in what is now Canada and the United States, since the two are inextricably linked in history and current events. The next episode will give us an understanding of how deep the connections were between the many nations of North America. And that's all I've got for today.
All right. That was exciting. That was good stuff.
Yeah. So we've got the next episode will probably be in 2 weeks. Well, and my sister-in-law will be the guest.
Nice. I'm looking forward to it.